All right, hello and good morning. I know it's early for some of you. It feels early for me. Happy National Diabetes Month. It's the most ridiculous oxymoron thing to say, but I'm saying it this month, and not because I'm happy that anybody has diabetes, but because I am happy that we have the opportunity to learn how to fix it. So today we are going to be talking about kind of the basics, starting point. We're going to be talking about education of type 2 diabetes and how to gain some awareness of whether you're a type 2 diabetic and where you're at with that. If we have any questions along the way, you can use the question and answer box to post any questions. I will get those and I will answer them as they come. If I think they need until the end, I will answer them at the end. There should be time for coaching. In fact, I specifically did this, developed this webinar with about a half an hour, 15 minutes to a half an hour at the end for coaching. So if anybody comes up with anything, if you have any questions that you want me to answer, and you want to have follow-up questions, we have a conversation about it, we can do that. If there's any issues, like you're like, I know this stuff, I know that I need to stop eating processed foods or whatever it is, and I can't seem to stop doing it, that's also appropriate for coaching. So make sure that if you, at the end, if you want to take advantage of that, that you put your hand up, we'll promote you to a panelist, we'll have a coaching moment or a few minutes of coaching and hopefully get you some clarity on why it is and maybe moving forward in that direction to where we let go of eating some of those things that don't serve us so well. All right. I'm going to share my screen for the slides, and we are going to jump in. So again, this is going to be education and awareness. We are going to talk about what type 2 diabetes is, and that alone gives you tons of strategies that most people are unaware of for how to remedy this condition. Lots of people think type 2 diabetes is about their blood sugar, because we as physicians diagnose everything based on blood sugars. That's why people believe that. There is an issue with your blood sugar, but that is not what's causing your type 2 diabetes. So when I talk about education, I'm not talking about your blood sugars are going to be here and these are the meds we teach. I'm not, and how do you prick your finger to check your blood sugars and how do you give yourself insulin injections? That is not the education that I am ever going to provide to somebody. In fact, somebody asked me yesterday, and I need to get back to them. They wanted to hear more about insulin, the latest information on insulin. And I'm like, my brain immediately is like, the latest information on insulin in my brain is like, you shouldn't be taking insulin, like avoid that stuff like the plague, right? So, and we're going to talk about why that is. Sorry, my cat, I'm moving forward because my cat wants to sit with me and it can't sit on my lap, but it can sit behind me. It gets distracting. So we are going to discuss what insulin is, why this is the issue, and why, treating type 2 diabetes, which is insulin resistance, why treating that with more insulin is not the right answer. So we will discuss that. So, but that will be here in a little bit. But I'm not sure if that person who asked me that is on this webinar. I'll check here in a minute. But understand that if you are on insulin, please be very careful making the changes that I recommend in general. All of the changes I make can be more challenging or even dangerous when you're on insulin. Get a clear line of communication with your physician so that you know what you need to do with your insulin. But do understand, the only reason insulin was started was because of the way you were eating, okay? It is possible to change the way you're eating in order to no longer need the insulin. So let's talk about insulin. Insulin is the root cause of many different diseases. Having too much insulin, high insulin, is the root cause of many different diseases. When we talk about metabolic disease, when we talk about metabolic health, insulin is at the heart of it. So I like to think of this high insulin as being the trunk of a tree. If you see this tree here, I think this tree is very pretty. I like the fall colors. But if you think about this trunk here, if you can see, oh, I don't know that you can see my pointer. Um, there we go. If you think of the trunk here, this is high insulin. The different branches that you see coming off of this tree are the diseases that are caused by too much insulin in your system. So this includes, of course, type 2 diabetes. That's what we talk about. That's what I talk about. That's what I help women with. Of course, it includes type 2 diabetes. And of course, it includes prediabetes. And of course, it includes gestational diabetes. But in addition, it also includes polycystic ovarian syndrome. It also includes non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. It also, a branch of this tree would also be Alzheimer's. A branch of this tree would also be hypertension. A branch of this disease, tree would also be dyslipidemia or high cholesterol. All of these different diseases and more are associated or have a root cause with too much insulin. Okay. If you've ever heard me talk about the studies, there were two studies. One was put out in 2019 by the University of North Carolina, and it looked at like 8,000 charts, 8,000 humans, Americans. And then that study and the outcomes were reproduced by Tufts University and published in 2021. And that one looked at 55,000 charts. Okay. When they looked at all of these charts and they looked at indicators of metabolic disease, so there's a number of different labs that they looked at, and we're going to look at that. We're going to talk about that a little later. But when they looked at those charts, what they found, the first study, the early study in 2019, showed that 87% of those charts had evidence of metabolic disease. 87%. So that's 9 out of 10 Americans. Okay. When they repeated it and published their works in 2021, when Tufts did this on a bigger scale, what they found out was 93% of those charts had evidence of metabolic disease. So recognize this high insulin level is the root cause, like that is the root cause of metabolic disease. And when you think about all of the different diseases that are caused by it, suddenly it becomes very clear, like, yeah, 9 out of 10 of us are metabolically unhealthy. 1 out of 10 of us are metabolically healthy. Okay. How you know whether you're metabolically healthy is that awareness component. And we're going to talk about how do we gain awareness of where our metabolic health is? Are we on this pathway to type 2 diabetes? So recognize that this is an element of something that we are doing. 9 out of 10 of us did not become ill because of a genetic predisposition. Okay. There is something we're doing. I always say we didn't become the dominant species on the planet because 9 out of 10 of us were destined to be diseased middle age. That's not the case. There's something we're doing, and the something that we're doing involves the food that we're eating. And that's the best news ever because now we have an opportunity to fix this. So we're going to talk about diabetes. We're going to talk about the physiology of type 2 diabetes. We're going to talk about the neurochemistry of type 2 diabetes and this food that we eat because it's why it's so hard to stop doing it. And then we're going to review the screening tests that are important for helping you figure out where you're at in your metabolic health. Before we get started, I do want to talk what is type 2 diabetes versus what is type 1 diabetes. Type 1 diabetes is typically something that's going to present in childhood, and it is going to be caused by too little, not enough insulin in your system. That is a different disease process, and I'm not going to talk about it today. I don't know. There's still information out there about whether this is entirely a genetic thing that we have no control over or whether there is control over it. What we're going to talk about today is type 2 diabetes, which is insulin resistance, which means you've got high insulin levels in your system such that your cells stop responding to it. Okay. That is a different pathophysiology, a different pathway than type 1 diabetes is. Do understand that a lot of times we are giving so much insulin because of the food that a type 1 diabetic wants to eat, being junk food, just like a type 2 diabetic wants to eat the junk food. We're ending up giving tons of insulin to these type 1 diabetics and creating a type 2 picture in those people later in life from long-acting insulin, providing tons of it, high concentrations over a prolonged period of time. So that is what causes insulin resistance. Insulin resistance is your cells being exposed to high concentrations of insulin over a prolonged period of time. The role of insulin is that your cells, in the presence of insulin, you've got a round cell, and when insulin's floating around, insulin binds to the cell and it causes the cell to open up and bring glucose inside to burn it off as fuel. Okay. When glucose is not in the bloodstream, your pancreas is not going to spit it. The organ that makes insulin is not going to put out insulin. So there won't be any floating around. The cells don't need to open up and bring it inside. But when we consume food and we break it down and it absorbs into our bloodstream, our pancreas says, oh, there's sugar here. We must need to burn that fuel off. Let's open the cells up and do that. So the pancreas puts out this messenger, insulin, and insulin binds to the cell and it says, hey, there's food here. Let's open up. Let's open up and take this glucose in. It pulls the glucose in and it burns it as energy for cellular metabolism, for whatever it is the cell needs to do. That's how it should work. When we are exposed to high concentrations over a prolonged period of time, the cell never opens up in the presence of insulin because it's always there. It's nothing new. We stop hearing the message. Okay. So the basic physiology or the basic biology of type 2 diabetes is actually that we develop insulin resistance first and then our blood sugars rise. Okay. That's how this works. In fact, I think this number is probably worse than what I'm going to tell you over more information, but I remember learning this 10, 15, 20 years ago, that you likely had the pathology, the disease of insulin resistance for at least 10 years prior to being diagnosed with type 2 diabetes, with the high blood sugars. Okay. So you were insulin resistant for at least a decade before your blood sugars started to climb. That's what we pick up. But if you go back to that tree and think about all the different diseases that insulin resistance and high insulin level is associated with, for a decade before that, you were at risk and prone to all these different diseases before you realized you were insulin resistant. And then your blood sugars went up and your doctor caught that and we started treating the blood sugars. Okay. So that's how the biology of diabetes works. You're insulin resistant long before you get high blood sugars. So insulin resistance is similar to how our ears work. So if you think about being close to a friend, like this picture has two ladies talking to each other, they're close. They can hear whispers. You can whisper to them. In that situation, you can whisper to your friend, and your friend can hear whatever you're saying. You can have very subtle communication, like you can cough, you can choke, they know you're choking, they're like, can I help you? All of this can happen when there's not a ton of noise going on, when your ears aren't over exposed to noise. Okay. You can have very subtle pieces of information and sound picked up by your ears when your ears are not exposed to high concentrations of noise over a prolonged period of time. But if you think about going to a rock concert, and I think many of us, I've had this experience, you go to a rock concert, it's very, very loud. The friend sitting next to you has to scream at you for her to get a message to you so you can hear it. And then when you come out of the concert, your ears aren't working correctly. They're like muffled the whole time, and you can't hear subtle noises. The solution to that scenario is never adding more noise. It's not like, oh, my ears aren't working right. Turn the radio up really loud. That's going to help. It's never to add more noise to make your ears be more sensitive to sound. That's never going to work. The answer to that scenario is you go home and you go to bed in your quiet room, and over time your ears heal and recover and you can hear again. You can hear sensitive, you can be sensitive to noise. You can hear subtle noises, you can hear whispers. But you have to remove the stimulus, get your ears out of being exposed to noise before that's going to happen. The same thing is true about insulin resistance. Your cells have been overexposed to insulin. And because of that, they stop responding as effectively to the insulin. And yes, Just like your friend at the concert can yell louder than the baseline noise in that building and get a message to you, yes, your pancreas can spit out more insulin and override that insulin resistance. But again, adding noise to too much noise doesn't fix the problem, and adding insulin to too much insulin doesn't fix the cell function. What you have to do is get the cells out from being exposed. Like we have to stop exposing our cells to insulin. We have to stop exposing our ears to noise, allow the ear to heal up, allow the cells to heal up. And then from that space, they start to function normally again. Okay. That's what we do. That's how you fix type 2 diabetes. So everybody asks, like, oh, well, so what's causing this? Why am I not working with the insulin correctly? Why is there too much insulin in my system? Why is this happening? What causes the body to make insulin is the food that we're eating. Primarily, there are some other subtleties to that, but I would say 75% of the insulin that you're making is being caused by the food that you eat. And this is a physiologic response. I know that's a big word, but stay with me here. This is a normal. Physiologic means this is just the way the biology of the body works. This is just the way it works. It is a normal response to develop insulin resistance eating these foods. So I say that and I take it like, I don't know, it's like my mission in life to let you know you are not broken. You are not genetically defective. You did not get this through some hereditary line. You didn't get it from your family. You are not all destined to be sick. This is a normal response to eating foods that are not normal to the human being. Okay. Everybody wants to tell me how they got their diabetes from their family, and I'm going to offer you I did not get diabetes from my family. What I got from my family was my love for apple pie and pizza. And that's what led to the same diseases that they had. It's not because there's something genetic that's been passed down to you. Okay. The standard American diet, the SAD diet, is full of foods that are not natural to the human being. We did not get into contact with pizza or tacos or brownies in nature. We never had a place in nature where we got into contact with those foods. There's not a Pop-Tart patch that we're pulling Pop-Tarts out of. Okay. These foods are not natural to us. And the response of our body to having this food that's not natural is to then develop insulin resistance and type 2 diabetes and non-alcoholic fatty liver disease and dementia and low testosterone and polycystic ovarian syndrome and all of the things. Okay. This is a normal response to these foods that are not natural to the human being. So let's talk about insulin and macronutrients. Insulin is produced based on certain macronutrients. Okay, so we have three macronutrients that make up the majority of our foods. And of those three macronutrients, like each of them have a different intensity of insulin response. I'm trying to check something here real quick. I apologize. So the three macronutrients are fats and fats, carbohydrates, and proteins. So if you're looking at the insulin response, the fats that are going, the macronutrient of fat is going to produce the least amount of insulin response in your body. Okay, it's very, very low. There's very, very little of it. If you look at the next one, which was protein, there's going to be a moderate insulin response to protein. But then with carbohydrates, there is a very intense, a high production of insulin when we eat carbohydrates. And when we look at the standard American diet, what we realize is it is just abounding with processed foods, with these these carbohydrates, these highly processed foods. So carbohydrates and highly processed foods go hand in hand. When we take natural foods and we process them, what we are doing is increasing. We are concentrating the carbohydrate component of that food. Primarily is 9 out of 10 times with processed foods, that's what's happening. And that's where processed foods become a problem. Because if we're concentrating the carbohydrate and the carbohydrate gives us the most intense response of insulin, we are concentrating and producing the most intense response of insulin that we can get. And we're concentrating that. And it's no wonder that we all have high insulin. It's no wonder 9 out of 10 of Americans are struggling with these things because we're producing tons of insulin because of our highly processed foods. These foods cause our blood sugars to climb, which causes our pancreas to put out a ton of insulin. It is not just the foods that we're eating, it's also the things that we're drinking. It's your Kappa Frappa Bappos from Starbucks, it's your Powerades, it's your Gatorades. Clearly, sodas are an issue. Lemonades from Minute Maid. All of these things are just a way that we take in sugar, we take in carbohydrates, and then our blood sugars rise and we have a high insulin response, an intense insulin response with that high blood sugar. Okay. The other problem is that we tend to start drinking this stuff when we first wake up in the morning and we stop drinking it right before we go to bed or eating it right before we go to bed. We are consuming it all day long. So when we talk about development of insulin resistance or the development of diabetes requires a high concentration over a prolonged period of time, the food that we eat and the way that we eat it in America is creating the perfect breeding ground for type 2 diabetes. So let's talk a minute about nutrient requirements because people really feel entitled to eat these foods, and you shouldn't not feel entitled. You can eat whatever you want. You guys are all grown-ups and you can do whatever you want, and that's fine, right? I always tell my clients, you're a grown-ass woman, you can do whatever you want. You can eat these foods, but do understand this is just the way the biology of these foods work, okay? The standard American diet is loaded with carbohydrates and concentrated carbohydrates, highly refined processed foods. It is loaded with these foods. What we end up doing is the primary part of our diet ends up being carbohydrates. And then as an add-on is going to be like your proteins and your fats. So when you think about required nutrients for a human being, there are many essential fatty acids and essential amino acids. And when I say many, there's not like hundreds of them, but there are requirements for us to essential amino acids and essential fatty acids. What that word essential means is that the human body cannot make them. We must consume them in our diet in order to have them and then utilize them by our bodies. Okay. Putting essential amino acids into muscle and protein, putting essential fatty acids into the cellular membrane that goes around our cells. Every one of them, there are 2 layers of fatty acids on there. Okay. So there are essential fatty acids and essential amino acids that we must consume in our diet. There is no essential carbohydrate equivalent. There is no carbohydrate that you must consume that your body cannot make. Your body is capable of making, the human body is capable of making all of the carbohydrate that you need. Okay. So recognize we really have this backwards. What we should be eating primarily is going to be proteins and healthy fats. And then the carbohydrates really should be secondary. I will offer, and I'll talk about this a little later, the carbohydrates do bring in healthy macro or micronutrients. So vitamins, the element things that we need, the minerals that we need. There are phytochemicals. So there are things, these chemicals, these phytochemicals, they come in these colorful foods, vegetables, and fruits that we eat. There is no way that we've, up to this point at least, cannot even reproduce those phytochemicals in a lab. Like you can only get them from food. Okay. So there are all sorts of things. Fiber comes in on carbohydrates, quote unquote, but not on these refined carbohydrates, of course. It comes in on natural carbohydrates. It comes in on carrots. It comes in on deep green vegetables. It comes in on broccoli. It comes in on, berries. That's where these important foods, that's where a carbohydrate necessity really is. Like we do need carbohydrates for that, but we do not need it for energy. We do not need, and we never need the highly refined stuff. Okay. So recognize that there is a role for carbohydrate in the human diet. And I am not saying eat only protein and fat every day. That is not what I'm saying. There is never a need though for a Snickers bar ever. Like that food is just not required by the body. And in fact, I don't even think it's neutral. I do think it causes disease in our body. Diseases like diabetes, prediabetes, polycystic ovarian syndrome, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, Alzheimer's. All of these diseases are thought to be caused by, evidence shows that there's a causative relationship between high insulin levels, which are caused by things like Snickers bars. Okay. So I don't even think a Snickers bar is a neutral thing. I think if you're going to eat it, you need to understand that there's a negative health consequence that's going to be associated with it. So let's look at the food that we're eating. These are a series of pictures that I took at my grocery store of food that's available in the standard American diet. This, they call it the cereal aisle. I call it the carbohydrate aisle. This aisle is all carbohydrates. There is very little, there's probably some fat, very little protein in this aisle, period, end of sentence. The entire aisle is probably 95% carbohydrates. Okay. This is the fitness bar aisle, and it's the same thing. So if you look at the label of a fitness bar, this fitness bar, you can see it says that it has 20 grams of protein here. But if you look over here, it has 24 grams of carbohydrates. It's still primarily carbohydrate. If you look at the kids' version of this food, you can see that there are 6 grams of fat, there are 5 grams of protein, and then there are 20 grams of carbohydrates. Again, this is primarily a carbohydrate food. This is Kashi. This is the expensive cereal, the cereal box. I used to love this stuff. And I thought because it was so expensive that it should actually like clean the dish and put it in the dishwasher for me because it was so expensive. This is supposed to be high quality food. And you can see 12 grams of protein, 2 grams of fat with 40 grams of carbohydrates. Remember, carbohydrates are causing you to have an intense surge of insulin. And to have an intense surge of insulin all day long, this is what creates insulin resistance in the human being. Quaker oats, I loved instant oatmeal, and I thought it was so healthy, and I thought I was doing something so good for myself. 4 grams of protein, 2 grams of fat, 33 grams of carbohydrates. Primarily, this food is carbohydrates. Bark Thins, I think it's hilarious that they put thin in the name, so it seems healthy, but you can, again, see 3 grams of protein, 11 grams of fat, 25 grams of carbohydrates. This is primarily a carbohydrate food. This is soda and it is sugar, and there is nothing else in there. There's not any fat, there's not any protein. This is strictly carbohydrates. This is a spread. This was the breakfast spread at one of the administration meetings at one of our local healthcare companies, like a large hospital in my town. This was the food that they served to the administration for breakfast. Okay. There's a lot of fat, probably, but even more carbohydrates. Okay. That's all that's in this food. It is no wonder that 9 out of 10 of us are sick with too much insulin in our system. This is what we eat in America. And this is what I mean by the standard American diet makes us sick. So, again, natural carbs like carrots, like bananas, like apples. I know the nutritionists will be like, don't eat the bananas. I want to offer. Nobody got diabetic because of their banana problem. That is not the issue. Carrots are not the problem. These foods are not the problem. Okay. They carry with them many micronutrients, vitamins and minerals. They carry fiber with them. They carry these phytochemicals. There are all sorts of good things in a carrot, in these natural carbs. And these things are not a major, these things that are carried on natural carbs are not a major component of processed foods. Okay. So again, how much is okay? I get this question very, very frequently. How much is okay? How many Snickers bars can I have? I really look at those highly refined processed foods that are not natural to the human body the same way I would a cigarette. Is one cigarette going to kill anybody? Probably not. Is one cigarette a year going to kill anybody? Probably not. Is one cigarette a month going to kill somebody? Gosh, I don't know. Maybe, maybe not. I don't know. One cigarette a week? One cigarette a day? Like if you're having a cigarette a day, that's probably going to be a problem. And this food is the same way. Is it once in a while? Is one Snickers bar a problem? No. Having it every day there's an accumulative effect that you're assaulting your body. And are you giving enough time for your body to heal from that assault before you reassault the body is really what it comes down to. Daily is probably too much. So think on it that way. Like the story that the general public has that a little bit's okay is not true. A little bit of cigarettes are probably not okay too, right? Or let's look at that maybe differently. A little bit of cigarette that looks like having it once a year is probably not a problem. A little bit of cigarette that looks like I'm having just one a day, that's probably still going to cause disease. So I want to talk about the neurochemistry of type 2 diabetes and what that means. Neurochemistry is what we're talking about in the brain, like the hormones that are produced in the brain. Everybody knows you don't, I did not tell you anything really enlightening by telling you that Snickers bars are not health food, okay? There is no big enlightenment I just gave you. The thing that keeps you going back to this food, even when you know it's not great for you, is because of the neurochemistry that's associated with this. So when we look at, I always think about, you've heard me say this probably a million times, what was happening 10,000 years ago? The things that were happening 10,000 years ago really match our biology, okay? So the food that was available 10,000 years ago should be the food that you're eating now because that's what your biology is. The change in our food sourcing, like how we eat, has happened so quickly that our biology has not had a time to adjust and learn how to manage it in a way that doesn't make us sick. Okay. So, because of that, you kind of have to think about what was happening. Our biology, the way it works, was happening 10,000 years ago. The things that we eat probably should have, be what we're eating, should have been available to us 10,000 years ago. Those things should match. All right. 10,000 years ago, when food wasn't relatively like abundant everywhere, it wasn't just hanging out in our houses and our caves, we had to go out of the cave, and the cave was safe and secure and warm, and the people we loved were there, and it was just wonderful to be in that space. Our brain wants to keep us there, right? Our brain is hardwired to keep us in that safe space, to avoid pain, to seek out pleasure, and to expend the least amount of energy possible while you're doing it. Our brain wants to keep us there, and the cave was a great place to do it. But the cave didn't have food, and we would have starved to death and died. So our brain had to create an incentivization program, essentially, to get us to get out of the cave and go and hunt and gather food. Okay. So what that is dopamine. Our brain, when we eat foods, when we eat berries, we get a dopamine surge in our brain. Dopamine feels good, and that's part of the effect that you experience with dopamine and when we eat. Dopamine also like in addition to feeling good, so you're going to feel good in the immediate space, but long term, dopamine drives motivation to repeat a behavior. So you're going to feel good, and then you're going to be strongly motivated to repeat that behavior. Okay. So dopamine was released when we would eat. Our brain would emphasize the importance of whatever we just did, like that motivation. So it was emphasizing the importance of berries on our body, essentially, on us surviving. And then, of course, we were motivated. We craved them. We desired it, but in a natural way because we got a natural surge of dopamine. We would eat these foods in a way that served us. We would remember that the berries grew behind that tree and that bush back behind the tree. We would remember that because we were motivated to pay attention to that food because of the dopamine. And then what we would do is we'd go out and search for the dopamine again and we'd eat berries. So 10,000 years ago, we weren't able to eat unlimitedly. Like, even if you wanted to eat the berries, like they weren't there. Like, once you cleared the bush of the berries, they were gone. Okay. What's happened in our modern society is one, that food is overwhelmingly, abundantly available to us, but also we have concentrated the carbohydrate component. So when we take that natural food and we artificially concentrate the nutrient, we get a concentrated release of dopamine. And now our brain is heavily motivated. We fixate. Our brain overemphasizes the importance of the food, and we are heavily motivated to find it again. And that looks like cravings and urges and desires. And then because we can find it so easily, we overconsume it. And that gives us even a larger release of dopamine into our brain. And suddenly we have the snowball effect. What was a natural cycle of keeping us alive and helping us seek out food in a way that serves our body and our health. That was a natural, gentle cycle. turns into the snowball effect that gets out of control and makes us sick. Okay. This is part of the neurochemistry that happens in our brain, why you keep turning to the Snickers bar even when you know it's a problem. It's not unlike an addict's brain. It's not unlike an addict's behavior. Okay. The receptor in our brain that drives that the dopamine binds to is the same receptor that actually is released from the dopamine is released from this receptor. But the carbohydrates bind to the same receptor in the brain that things like Dilaudid or morphine or heroin, these opioids that we're having such a problem with in this country, fentanyl, all of those things, they use the same neuroreceptors that sugar and carbohydrates are binding to in our brain to release this dopamine and heavily drive us to eat these foods or use those drugs. Now, nobody's stealing from grandma to get their next fix of M&Ms. I understand that. It's not as intense, but it is the same neurochemistry, which is why we feel so almost out of control and like there's a compulsion to eat it. But second, when you don't eat it, you're going to have withdrawal experiences. And that is because of the way this neurochemistry is working in our brains. Okay. Expect that as you break up with these foods, your brain is going to be pissed about this and going to try to talk you into going back to the thing, even when it doesn't serve our health. Okay. That is one of the gifts of being a human being is that we're able to see that. I don't think my dog would eat a whole bag of dog food if I let her, right? Because she doesn't know that she's actually going to be sick. As a human being, we're able to see, have this metacognition, this awareness of what our brain is telling us and realizing that our brain is telling us this even when it doesn't serve us. So let's talk about awareness because we just talked about why it's a problem. And hopefully there is some new information there, like why the Snickers is a problem. I hope you have a deeper understanding about why a Snickers bar is a problem, but it's nothing new. You've known all along that the Snickers bar is a problem. Okay. Let's talk about how you figure out where you're at with your metabolic health. So there are a number of labs that you can go to your physician and have them order, and you can look at their results. Sometimes doctors won't do it, and that's partly because maybe they don't feel like insurance will cover some of these labs. And the other part is sometimes they don't know what to do with the information. Okay. The best medical lab that I use and that more and more evidence is coming out for is the fasting insulin level. It's a blood draw. You go, your doctor will order it. You go to the lab, they draw your blood and they run an insulin level. You need to make sure you're fasting if your doctor doesn't know that you need to be fasting. You just need to know that when you go get that lab drawn, you need to be fasting. That means you haven't eaten for at least 8 hours. Okay. A fasting insulin level is one of the best ways to determine where your metabolic health is. Your lab will report it out as okay or normal if it's below 15. What we know, the literature supports, is it probably needs to be below 7 or 8 to give you evidence of metabolic health. Okay. Meaning between 8 and 15, say your number comes out at a 10, there is evidence that you still may have metabolic disease even in that range, and the lab doesn't flag it as abnormal. Okay. Fasting insulin is one of the best tests we have right now to look at metabolic health. Okay. A hemoglobin A1C is another one. And if you're listening to this or watching this, you have probably you know what a hemoglobin A1C is. Hemoglobin A1C gives you an average of what your blood sugar's been over the last 3 months. You can't cheat it. Like back in the day before the A1C was there, people would just like straighten up and fly right for the week before they went and saw their doctor, and they could get a blood sugar reading on their chemistry panel to be low, and their doctor wouldn't yell at them or try to start more meds or try to make them feel guilty. Fine. We realized that we could run this other test, a hemoglobin A1C, and it gives you an average of 90 days of what your blood sugars have been. Understand that you can't get that test ran every week and expect it to be different because it's an average of what's happened over the last 90 days. Okay. So it takes 90 days to kind of see a shift in your A1C if you've been, doing the things that you know are going to help your blood sugars and your diabetes out. Another reading that I like to look at is the triglyceride reading on a cholesterol panel. So triglycerides are actually the part of the fat in your blood that's made from carbohydrates. It's not the fat that you got from your steak. It's the fat that's developed from the burger, the bun. Okay. So a triglyceride reading is a great way to get a marker of metabolic disease. Again, you're going to want the triglycerides probably like there's new evidence. We used to say it was normal at 150 or less. There's new evidence that you probably really want to 80 or less. Okay. So getting that low um, is what you're shooting for. The hemoglobin A1C, I didn't mention what kind of the normal was. If you are medicated with a diagnosis of type 2 diabetes, your doctor is going to get off your back if your A1C is less than 7. If you are not medicated, your doctor is going to tell you you're not diabetic if it's less than 6.4. So 6.4 to 7, that's still a diabetic diagnosis. Okay. But your doctors may not start meds in that range. All right. If you're 5.7, 5.8 to 6.4, it depends on who you're talking to. I think that it all needs to be less. So 5.6 to 6.4 is kind of that pre-diabetic range, okay? Where the docs will be like, oh, you're pre-diabetic, you better straighten up, fix your diet. What we know is you are insulin resistant at that point, period, end of sentence. You're definitely insulin resistant in that pre-diabetic range. And that means that this insulin is wreaking havoc in all sorts of other areas of your body, all or other organ systems, and that it's still evidence of metabolic disease. They're going to get off your back if it's 5.6 or less. They're going to be like, high five up top. You did great. Strong work. We don't need to talk anymore. They literally will tell you, we don't need to talk to you. You don't need to come in and see me again about this. What we know in the medical literature that actually that A1C probably needs to be 5.4 or less for there to be no evidence or a low likelihood of insulin resistance. And remember that insulin resistance is what's causing this metabolic disease. So really, what do you want? If you just want to stay off of insulin, keep your A1C less than 7. Okay. If you're wanting to actually be healthy though, and like have no evidence of metabolic disease in your body, your A1C probably needs to be 5.4 or less. Okay. We talked about the triglycerides. ALT, it's a liver enzyme indicative for us of the effect of high insulin on your liver. And again, the lab's going to tell you it's normal if it's less than like 25 or 30, but we know it really needs to be less than 17 for you to not have evidence of metabolic disease. And then lastly, your LDL. We know an elevated LDL. We know that a human being who's insulin resistant does not manage their cholesterol correctly. So if you have a high LDL, that's probably evidence to us that you have insulin resistance going on. And when you improve your insulin resistance, a lot of times you're going to see this LDL number improve also. So what can you do at home? Like, what can I do today that I don't have to go talk to the doctor about? I don't have to beg them for the test and I don't have to set up an appointment. And what can I do? There are two things that can be very helpful. A waist circumference measurement is very correlated and has been for years and is such low tech way to get information. Okay. So waist circumference less than 35 inches is what you're shooting for. Anything above that is highly associated with metabolic disease and has been for years. So that's one thing you can look at. The other thing you can do is go get a glucometer. In my state, it is required that any pharmacy must carry a glucometer and it's set up so you can take the box home and start using it tonight for less than $20. So go to the store, get a glucometer. You will get 30 days of strips with that. So you can take 30 blood sugar readings with it. And you can get some idea of what your blood sugars are doing. Looking for a fasting blood sugar of less than 100 consistently. So I took my blood sugar every day for a week and 6 out of 7 of them were less than 100. That's probably pretty good. If you took your blood sugar every day for a week and 6 out of 7 of them were above 100, you're probably insulin resistant. Okay. The fasting blood sugar, you're going to check it first thing in the morning when you wake up. I don't care if you're still fasting at 10 o'clock because you don't eat. Ideally, you're checking it first thing in the morning when you wake up. Okay. That is a relatively cheap, easily accessible way to get some information about insulin resistance for you. Okay. Where are you at on your metabolic health? Where are you at with insulin resistance? So that is what I have for awareness. There is my email if you need to get a hold of me, and you probably already know this, but it's Delane at Delane MD. I am going to figure out how to get here we go. So I'm pulling up the chat to see if anybody had any questions, anything in there. You are more than welcome to put questions in the chat box. You are more than welcome to put questions in the question and answer box. I will answer all of those things. If you want to do some coaching, hop on. Like, let's do some coaching. I'm happy to walk anybody through any of that. Um, as questions may be coming out or people are interested, you can also raise your hand and we can do coaching that way. There are going to be more of these every Wednesday, except for Thanksgiving week. And that webinar will be on Friday, and it will be primarily for coaching so that we can work through any issues that came up with the holiday or any concerns or anything with that. If you haven't already looked at it, check out the information that I've put out about holiday planning and how to plan for your holidays in order to keep you feeling in control of your health. So Patty's asking about an LDL. What number? What range? Thanks. That's a great question. LDLs, so here's the deal. Your doctor is going to want to drive them below 70 if you carry a diagnosis for type 2 diabetes. The thought process behind that is having high cholesterol puts you at a risk for stroke and cardiac disease, and having diabetes puts you at a risk for stroke and cardiac disease. So if we can pull this risk down, we improve your overall risk. That's the reason that they look for that. When you aren't insulin resistant, when you're not consuming a ton of carbs, we aren't even sure what a high LDL means in that scenario. So if you're eating a low carbohydrate diet and you're not having a bunch of processed foods, we don't even know how dangerous LDL is in that scenario. So what's the right number? It's a hard target to hit. I would say you're going to want it above 70 and under 100. Recognize that your cholesterol is the backbone, is the building block, is the basis for building your estrogen and your progesterone and your testosterone. So when we as physicians drive your LDL and drive your cholesterol super, super low, your body no longer has the building block that it needs to make these hormones. So too low is not great, and too high has some negative information associated with it also. So really, if your A1C is normal and your insulin level is normal and your fasting sugars are normal and your ALT looks great and your numbers are looking good and your LDL is 90, that's probably fine. I would say it's probably fine if it's 110, right? But your doctor is going to want to drive it lower. So I hope that answers that question, Patty. Do again understand that there's a lot of subtleties to cholesterol, and we do not understand. We as physicians, we will tell you we know it and this and that. There are so many subtleties most physicians do not understand, me included, all of the subtleties of what cholesterol really means. What we do know is that the insulin resistant human being is not filtering. Basically, your liver goes through and says, hey, do we need this fat? Do we not need this fat? Yes, no, yes, no. Your liver goes through and manages your cholesterol in a way that's supposed to keep you healthy. When you're insulin resistant, that is not happening. And so your cholesterol numbers are haywire. Okay. So that is one thing that we know. What we are also realizing is that statin therapy, so simvastatin, atorvastatin, pravastatin, rosuvastatin, all of these, I went to school for a long time to be able to say all those names. Crestor, Lipitor, those kinds of drugs for cholesterol. Those meds, we used to think that the improvement in cardiovascular health had to do with lowering that cholesterol level. And what we're realizing is those meds, that class of meds, is actually a super potent anti-inflammatory, and that we're starting to think that it's the anti-inflammatory effect that actually benefits our cardiovascular health, not lowering our cholesterol. Okay. So there's a lot of mixed evidence out there. I am never going to tell you to eat bacon all day long. That is not healthy. I am never going to tell you to eat steak all day long. Like, I don't know, I would love to have a steak. I have an allergy to meat, so I can't do that. But I don't believe steak a few times a week is a problem. I do believe that we have to get high quality meats. That is important. Meats that are raised on food that they're meant to eat. Because the health of the animal that you're eating is going to dictate the health of you. And if we're feeding animals just the same way that we eat foods that aren't meant for us, it doesn't match our biology. If we're feeding animals foods that don't match their biology, they're not healthy anymore for us to eat. Okay. And that changes our health. So I would offer that there is some information there, but don't, bacon is not an all for none. Like there's not a free license to eat bacon all day long. That's never going to be what I'm saying. Um, but that doesn't mean then that we need to be eating Snickers bars either, right? Like figuring out that middle ground. Eating high quality, healthy meats is not likely to cause you to have some disease, stroke, heart attack, those sorts of things, unless you've got some underlying condition going on. So, that perfect number for the LDL is a hard one to answer. I apologize. The perfect number for cholesterol in general is a hard one to answer. All right, I could go on for that for hours. If you want to hear it, let me know. But if not, I'll save that for another discussion. So if anybody else has any questions, make sure you put it in there. I'm going to look one other place to make sure there are no questions. And then if nobody has anything else, we can sign off, but I want to make sure everybody has what they need. I am going to, nope, it looks like nobody's in there. All right. So I'm going to stop sharing and I am going to exit out of the Q&A and the chat is empty. So if you have anything that you have any questions about that come up after this, don't hesitate to reach out to me by email, Delane@DelaneMD. I am happy to answer any questions at DelaneMD.com. And then next week, we'll be back with another webinar. That one, we're going to be talking about kind of, you know, National Diabetes Month is going to be like, oh, treatment and management. We are going to be talking about reversal strategies. We are going to be talking about how, do I change the food that I'm eating in a way that keeps me from being type 2 diabetic? How do I do that? How long do I do that? Those kinds of things I'm going to talk about next week. Again, Thursday after or Friday after Thanksgiving, it's going to be primarily coaching. And then the last Wednesday of the month, we're going to talk about the strategy that I teach women for reversing type 2 diabetes. So make sure you stay tuned to all of those things. If for some reason you're not getting emails, for some reason like they fell off because technology, I struggle with it, let me know. I've done something wrong. I probably just need to set a setting and you're not the only one. So make sure you send me an email and we'll get you those links and make sure you can be at all of those webinars. All right, I will talk to everybody next week.